All righty. So if we could get those first slides, that'd be great. I'm from Texas, from Austin, Texas, and I really enjoyed this conversation you were just having. I've got 4 kids. I got 2 in graduate school and 2 still in high school. So these kinds of things you're talking about are exactly what we're thinking about as well. Let me start with some slides here. I'm going to go through a little bit of a talk, and then the goal is to leave some time for questions for you all right? So most people don't know how electricity is made or where gasoline even comes from. And this is a bit of a conundrum because it makes it tough when you start talking about things energy. And we think we do, but we really don't. So I'm going to do this as 3 questions. And it's interesting, you were teeing some of those up the session before. Is fracking bad? Is oil running out? And can we switch to renewables fast? Okay? So let's look at some data. And there are going to be 3 questions. I'm going to give you a quiz because you're students mostly, right? But don't get nervous. Here's the kind of questions we're going to have. Expand this polynomial up here to the right. You see that? A plus b to the n. See their answer? They start expanding it, and they just keep expanding it and expanding it to the bottom where it says etc. Okay, so very funny, Peter, the teacher says. The other one I want to catch you with is this one. Find x. Well, here it is. All right, so that's a great answer to a pretty dumb question. So don't be nervous. That's the kind of questions we're going to have. Is fracking bad? Well, I think most people think about fracking like this in the former session, kind of like this. So here's the frack truck, and it's driving frack fluids out to the well site. Only they look like toilets, and they're about to go into a bridge, which is pretty low. And the public is riding peacefully behind in their convertible, okay? And the public is about to have a surprise, and that's what the public perception of fracking is like. So what is it really? What's fracking? It's drilling a well straight down. That's been going on, again, for quite a long time. Not always perfect, but a pretty well-regulated industry. You take it horizontal, up to 2 miles now, or close to 3 kilometers. Have you ever run 3 clicks? 3 kilometers horizontally. You inject fluids at pressure, mostly water, with some sand to prop it open, and about 1% other chemicals, which are getting more benign. And then you see these things wiggling? Those are frac stages. I hope you can see that. Can you guys see that from this side at all? You got it? Let me get out of the way. I worked hard on the airplane to make those wiggle, so I want you to see that. And then you produce fluid back to the surface with methane and oil and quite a bit of water. And that water has to be re-injected and disposed or reused and recycled. Why do we do it? Here's a picture of a rock. This is a shale from Texas, the Barnett. Little teeny holes, how small? Here's a pore with methane molecules. It's just a picture, but I'm going to shrink them, carbon and 4 hydrogens, down to the same scale as this picture. It's highly magnified. It almost goes away, but those little methane molecules, you can still see them. These holes are teeny. Here's a human hair, at least something colored to look like one. Let's call it 50 microns wide. I'm going to shrink the pores onto the hair to the same scale. All right? About 100 to 200 pores, the width of one human hair. That's why you have to frack it. The methane and the oil do not flow out of those little holes by themselves. You have to crack it and make pathways for that to happen. Is it worth doing? Well, here's a look at the natural gas resources in the world against the cost to get to them. And to the left, that white line I just drew is all the methane produced and consumed in the world so far. To the right are potential new resources. It's a lot. And tight gas, cemented sandstone, shale gas, and coal gas are a big part of that portfolio. Those all have to be fracked to get the gas out. Natural gas in the U.S. looks like this. It was declining, conventional gas out of reservoirs where it would flow well, but along comes tight gas and coal bed and finally shale gas. So now it's increasing. These unconventional reservoirs, in fact, if you go to today, it looks like this. Shale is now almost half of the U.S. production of gas. So there's an example of it, how it's working today, good and bad, already in the United States. Question this just earlier, what about the environmental impacts of all oil and gas activities? Well, you've got to mine the sands off of the walls of outcrops to get the proppants to put into the fracks. And the technologies they're improving. I'm showing you the bottom, and I'll put these up on a website. You can grab them later. And there is stuff that goes on around a well site, the noise and the lights and the roads and the dust. Okay, it's not fun. It's kind of inconvenient for a while. The well pad itself, you produce this stuff back to the surface. Sometimes those little earthen dams leak. Not very often. It's very well regulated, but on occasion, they'll flow into a local stream, and you stop that. Treatment and disposal, you produce the fluids, they have to go back into the earth if you don't reuse and recycle them. It's called disposal wells. Again, it's been going on for a century, but more now with fracking. And finally, the production itself. You can see the fracked horizontal well there. It looks like it's about 3 little huts away from the surface. And all the pictures I see in the media look like this. These pictures aren't to scale. So let me put this picture to scale. Here we go. So watch the surface and down to the fracking level. About thousands of feet of solid rock between the surface and where that fracking goes on. And what does that look like with real data? This is the Barnett, one of the early shale gas plays. All the chatter across the bottom, that's the depth of the wells coming from deepest to shallowest. And that chatter is possible disturb zones. The blue across the top is the depth of the freshwater aquifer, up to 1,000 feet. So to the right-hand side, it gets pretty close. How close? Here's the tallest building in the world. Here's Tom Cruise sitting on it, okay, for Mission Impossible 28 or whatever the film was. So it pictures solid rock between Tom and the earth. Solid rock, we're going to put Tom where he belongs to scale, and we're going to shrink the building to the scale of this picture. So you got about 1.5 of those, and that building's about half a mile tall, just under 2,500 feet, over 1 kilometer tall. So if you get too close to the water, yes, it can happen. But that'd be a dumb set of regulators, allowing things to go on that shouldn't happen, okay? So these things happen. They're local, they're not regional typically, but they're real. And there are people worry about it. I've heard you worrying about it. Is fracking gonna ruin the world? It's like this. Here comes, actually this is the winner of the last photo taken contest, okay? This is this guy's last picture. Here's the runner-up in that same contest. That's his last photo ever taken. All right. If you're going to be stupid, you better be tough. That's the message there. You trade this off. And the minister said it. Do you trade off the environment against energy? Is it energy or the environment? I bet many of you think yes, actually. And I bet you've been educated that way. I don't think that way either. I think energy, if people ask me energy or the environment, I say yes, because they both have to work together. And your future depends on that happening, because the demand for energy continues to grow. So is fracking bad compared to what? That's the question you need to ask, and it's rarely asked. Compared to what? It has issues. Nothing's perfect. Everything has issues, okay? Is oil running out? Well, we use a lot of oil, and here's Asia. The green is diesel and gasoline, and the yellow is jet fuel. So those are petroleum products out to 2040, a forecast increasing. Demand for liquids is increasing in the world as more people get cars. I'll come to questions near the end, bud. Promise. So what does global oil production look like? Well, here it is. This is developed and not developed nations. Exact same data, OPEC, non-OPEC, and the former Soviet Union. You can see it increasing. Same exact data by geopolitical region, with North America, us, in blue at the bottom. And when I was learning how to drive in the 70s, we were increasing our consumption of oil. It flattened after an embargo, but it's increasing again, 34 billion barrels a year. That's a giant oil tanker. You've seen them on the ocean. Every 11 minutes. We consume an oil tanker every 11 minutes in the world. Where's all that going to come from? Again, left to the white line is everything produced and consumed. To the white are possible oil or oil equivalent resources, all right? Now we have conventional oil offshore in the Gulf of Mexico here, the Arctic potentially. Certainly Russia is looking hard at the Arctic. We have the unconventional reservoirs. This is your oil sands in Canada, where we filmed for the film Switch, the SAGD operation. And finally, we have shales. So they're more expensive, but they're big. There's a lot of oil and gas in these shale reservoirs around the world. At $100, I can go after a bunch of it. See the green line? I can afford to go after these unconventional reservoirs because they're more expensive. When that price falls to $50, not so much. And that's the dynamic today with oil price and natural gas price. It's a very, very volatile business. Both my older sons in graduate school are heading into it, okay? So the production of oil in the United States looks like this. It looks like a mountain. You heard about peak oil, and this is why that name came. This goes back to 1859 when it was first discovered. And people worry when they hear about peak oil. They're out here in Canada in the Arctic having a good day fishing, and all of a sudden, things go south. They worry about it because it sounds dramatic. Let's look at the rig count for oil in the United States. Man, it went up high as the oil price went from $10 to $100 back to $50. Remember, when price is high, you can afford to go after the shales. And here's the production of shale oil in the United States. In the last few years, it's gone from essentially nothing to 4 million barrels a day. That's a tremendous amount of oil. It makes this picture, let's put it on here at the same scale. You can barely see it, but there it is. And I'll draw a fat green line around it, get rid of the data. That's what oil production looks like in the U.S. today. It's gone from this peak almost back up to the same peak because of new technology and new ways of thinking. Can we switch to renewables fast? Here's the price of wind in the world, the global levelized average, and here's the price of solar. It's been coming down. It's almost half of what it once was, which is a great thing. But it's still relatively expensive. Europe is trying very hard to make this happen. This is the actual cost of residential electricity in Europe by country. And you can see the more wind and solar you have on the left, the more expensive it, on the bottom, the more expensive it is. It's a pretty good fit. So regardless of what you might hear today, the actual cost, because there are lots of costs associated with renewables, not just the installation, but the backup that you have to do and other kinds of things. This is the data today in 2015. Therefore, the developed nations have been investing a lot in renewables, but they've actually peaked in their investment. It may go back up again, but for the last 3 years down relative to the growing nations, the developing nations, which are still rising. Okay? Now, what happened in Japan? Here, let's look at a couple examples, and then I'll open it up to questions. What happened in Japan? This is before Fukushima Daiichi, the big tsunami. Okay? A lot of nuclear in Japan. You can see the orange color. What do you think happened when they shut down all their nuclear power plants? What did they use instead in Japan? Some coal, a lot of natural gas, more oil, no more renewables. 4 years later. And why is that? What happened here in a bigger scale? If you look at North America, again, red is natural gas, gray is coal. This is us, North America and Europe. Has this happened? Has coal been replaced by natural gas and nuclear? Yes, it has. The red is natural gas growing in a decade, the gray is coal. The emissions have come down as a result, and it was mentioned just this session before, down to early 1990s levels of CO2. Now that natural gas still emits CO2 when you burn it, but it's less. So it's a good trend, and some people call that a bridge. Has this happened in Europe? You would think it would, right? Europe is a pretty green-thinking set of economies, but what happened in Europe? They put a moratorium on fracking in some of the big countries, a moratorium on nuclear post-Fukushima, so guess what's happening in Europe? If you're not burning methane and you're not using nuclear to make electrons, what are you doing? You're burning more coal. So Germany is taking physical delivery from here, North America to Germany, where they mix it with lignite and burn more. So the CO2 emission stream has actually not been very good. What about in Asia at the same scale, and the gray is coal? It's just a forecast, but it's coal. And this is a great challenge. How can we translate other kinds of technologies to developing nations to use? So China puts out way more CO2 emissions in the last several years than anybody else on Earth. The U.S. is the least because of fracking, ironically. Now, let's not blame China. I'm not going to say, oh, bad China, look at all your CO2 emissions. Does anybody in here that's not wearing something made in China? I bet you can't, I bet nobody in this room has nothing on their body made in China. So we are demanding their products. It's a global challenge. You can't look over there and say, you pollute, we don't, if they're making this stuff you need. Okay? It's a global challenge. And why did we do this? Because coal is cheap. 8 cents a kilowatt hour for electricity in China and India. It's the most affordable, available, reliable source of fuel. On the other end is Germany. Remember, moratorium on fracking, moratorium on nukes. They pay more money, about 3 to 4 times. And that's one of the great challenges as we go forward. So I worry. We don't always know what end of the chainsaw we're pulling on. And I hope there are still some politicians I get to talk to them next in the room. Because sometimes political intention has unintended consequences. And I've just shown you a couple examples of that. So let's wrap it here. The energy mix in the world looks like this. The whole world, oil, natural gas, coal, nuclear, hydro, and renewables. Still about 84% from fossil fuels in the world. Now, if we start to look at regions, the U.S. and North America, Canada and U.S. look about like the world. Europe and Russia, about like the world. More hydro in South America, more coal in Africa, oil and gas in the Middle East, and the Asia Pacific, half coal. Not electricity, total energy, half from coal. I'm going to shrink these and grow these to be proportional to consumption today. Here we go. That's how much we actually consume in the world. So even though the land mass is big, the number of people and whether you're developed matters. Half the people in the world live inside that right-hand color wheel. Over 3.5 billion people live in that color wheel alone. Less than half the people in the world live all in the rest of the world. And half of that comes from coal. So this is one of the great challenges. Coal continues to increase in the world. This is the global mix back 25 years. So does natural gas, and oil as a percentage is going down. Made a film, if you want to see it on Amazon, called Switch. We went all over the world and looked at this. You can stream it for $3 in high def. So the big part about the U.S. that I want to end with, and we end here with Switch, is efficiency. If we had not become more efficient, the consumption in the United States would look like that red line. The yellow part is what's been saved, not used, because of increased efficiency. Okay? Now, we got a long way to still go, but the world, that's a big pile of energy that we could go after, as opposed to some of the other things which are equally expensive. We can use energy a lot better than we do today. So the questions, is fracking bad? Well, it makes affordable, reliable energy. But yeah, it has to be done right to be environmentally sustainable. It has to be well regulated. And those who don't do it, penalized. Is oil running out? A lot of resources still in the world, a bunch. But they get more expensive to develop, and you need the technology. And finally, can we switch fast? Well, the resource quality varies for sun and wind. Okay? So not everybody can use it. The transition will likely be slow. It takes time to transition major infrastructure from one thing to another. And efficiency is a big part of that. All right? So I'll leave you with this thought. Academics and governments and industry and NGOs working together is where these things are going to get solved. I call it the radical middle because there aren't many people there. We all like to be in our little corners. But the radical middle, I hope, is where you guys are going to want to work and work on the compromises. Because you look around the table at one another, some of you are going to be working for government, some are going to be in industry, some are going to be in academics and teaching, some are going to be in non-governments. You're going to be all over the place. And you want to work together to take on some of these big issues. If we don't do it, we're going to end up like these guys. They're putting in these posts to keep people from parking next to the building. All right. I think they forgot where they parked. And sometimes I worry we're so busy putting in posts, we kind of forget the bigger picture. All right, so this is my airplane. Not really, but I wish it was. Hey, thanks, and I'm happy to do questions. All right, I know somebody had one back here. Yes, got the the football.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you explain in simple terms how the cost of oil is relative to LNG production?
Sure. So why is the cost of oil relative to LNG production? When the price of oil is high, at least historically and still to some degree, the price of natural gas tends to follow that. In some places they're a substitution fuel, but certainly in some places they're produced together. So the price of natural gas tends to follow oil somewhat, less today than it has in the past, but they're still relative to one another. If the price of oil goes low, price of natural gas starts to come down. And one of the things about LNG is you're sending it from where it's cheap to where it's more expensive. And it's that price spread that lets you afford to be able to do that, all the infrastructure and the shipping and all the costs to do that. If prices for natural gas come down around the world, that price spread doesn't exist. So your LNG doesn't have a market. Does that make sense? If it's cheaper in Asia than it has been in the past, who's going to buy it here? Because there are a lot of costs to get it there. And that price tracks to some degree the price of oil. Okay. Yes, sir. Right here with the cap. Throw it. I bet he's got good hands. All right. Good catch.
This isn't working. Oh, there we go.
There you go.
So it's going to be up in the north, the plants, right?
There's several proposed.
Right. Mm-hmm. Wouldn't that be leveling the forests and ruining them?
Well, depends on where it's built.
Right.
And any big infrastructure in the world is going to have an environmental impact.
Right.
That is a reality. And so you have to think about where you can do that best, where the environmental impact will be minimized, and then, like I show, what the advantages are of that LNG to jobs and the economy. And, by the way, I want to make this link, energy, the environment, and the economy, that little triangle of ease. When economies are in good shape, we invest in the environment.
Right.
When the economies are not in good shape, and there are several in the world today, there's no environmental investment that can take place because you're worried about other things. So it's a fine dance. And so that's the challenge here is, and the minister said it well, where do you invest? Where do you bring in jobs and money to let the economy be solid and invest in the environment and do it well? But yes, sir, if you're living right there, you'll probably have to, depending on the coastal situation, you might have to cut down some trees. You're certainly going to have to make some land level. These are big sets of infrastructure. I've been to them in the world. They're big. So, yep.
I also have another question.
Okay.
Regarding the coal.
Yep.
Places like China are using it right now.
Yes.
What's going to make them want to buy our energy? And like, by the time we get rid of coal, wouldn't using the LNG plants just be as bad if we used it as long as we plan we are?
Particularly for CO2 emissions, is that what you're asking specifically?
Wouldn't that be just as bad as coal, if we keep using it?
Yeah. So when you burn coal, you emit a certain amount of CO2 per ton. When you burn methane, carbon and four hydrogens, you emit less in an energy equivalent basis, but still CO2. So yes, if you were to use both of those resources completely up, I think is what you're asking, you're going to put it out there regardless. Right. What's going to cause China to not use coal? Well, it has to be something that's more affordable, available, and reliable. Okay? Otherwise, they're going to continue to feed the economy with coal, like the rest of us have done. England did it, the US has done it. People with coal have used it to build economies. So you have to have an option that's scalable. And this is the real trick. Why can't we just switch to renewables fast? I think I showed some quick slides on that. You know, there's a lot that goes on because wind and solar are very low density fuels. A lot of infrastructure, a lot of turbines, big solar collecting facilities to get the amount that we need. So the transition potentially is from coal through methane, which is no SOx, no NOx, no mercury, no particulate matter, but CO2, yes, not as much. So there's a lot of environmental good things about methane relative to coal. China has to be able to get to it in an affordable, available, reliable way. LNG can help with that.
All right.
Okay?
Thank you.
You bet. Good question. Yep. Football.
Doesn't
over here.
fracking cause earthquakes?
So, good question. We're dealing with that down in Texas and Oklahoma for sure. The fracking itself makes earthquakes every single time, but they're very, very little. So remember my picture of the fracking down at depth? On a Richter scale, if you're familiar with that, the Richter scale is a logarithmic scale. It goes from 0 on up. It actually can go negative. So the fracking earthquakes are negative on the Richter scale, -1, -2, -3, 10 to the -1. The earthquakes associated with oil and gas activity is when they take those fluids and produce them and dispose them back into the earth. It's not at high pressure, but it's large volumes over long periods of time. If those fluids are near a natural geologic fault, a break in the earth that exists, it can change the pressure in the earth and cause that to move sooner than it would have. And that movement can cause an earthquake that you'll feel at the surface. It's pretty rare. We have 7,500 disposal wells in Texas. About 10 of them are potentially associated with earthquakes. So not a large number, but yes, it can. And regulation and intelligent spotting of those wells could even prevent those. Has it caused major damage yet? Some. Locally. Not a lot, but some. If it started happening all over the place, yeah, not a good idea. But I think this is a very solvable thing.
Okay. You mentioned like shipping gas to China. How would we ship enough gas to China to lower the amount of coal they use by significant amounts? That doesn't seem realistic that our one little area supplies enough gas for China.
That's a great observation. So it doesn't. You can't ship enough gas to China to make a difference in their CO2 emissions. BC can't, okay? But what could happen? If different parts of the world, and they are, start to open up and build LNG export facilities, and they're growing, and economies start to build importing or degasification facilities, that infrastructure, that system of moving gas around the world becomes large. So we do it today with oil. We already have an example of how that works. Oil is shipped all over the world today, okay? And its price is kind of a global price because of that. Methane's price is all over the place. The big fancy word for that is fungible, okay? Fungible, you can look it up. Methane is not fungible in terms of physical delivery. So you can't do it, but there's methane coming from many other places. The US is looking at export facilities. The Middle East does it. Australia is doing it. Lots of Trinidad, Tobago, and other places. So you set up that system, and now that global system starts to have methane replacing coal. Okay. We're probably pressing my time, so anybody grab me who needs to get me the other talk when you need to. Sure.
Hi. I was just wondering about how you're using the water to frack the natural gas out of the ground. But what happens when the water leaks or something and it ends up in rivers and lakes and affects the marine economy there?
Yeah. So I went through that slide pretty quickly. So when you put the hydraulically pressured water down at depth, a mile or two down in the rocks, that water does not come to the surface because it has 2 or 3 of those buildings of rock in between it and the surface, okay? Now, when you produce it to the surface through the wellbore, and by the way, that doesn't require fracking. Any oil and gas activity produces water. It can leak through the casing. There's steel pipes and cement cased to rock at the surface. And that's done pretty well. But on occasion, those can leak into the local wellbore environment. We know it's happening, and you can shut it in. So it's not a good thing. But again, it's not a regional thing. The other way that happens is when the water is caught at the surface before it's re-injected, sometimes those holding pits, if you will, breach and can leak into a local stream. Again, it's very rare that that happens, And sometimes it's even done by people who are trying to, and I mean this, actually, they'll break the wall of a dam to let it leak to get the operator in trouble. People who are protecting the environment actually hurt it to try to get the operator in trouble. So this is a weird set of thinking, right? But those can leak on occasion. Those are two ways to get it into the groundwater at the surface, and it's typically pretty local. Neither one good. They're both very much solvable, though. Okay? The concept that the regional aquifer is going to be contaminated is inaccurate. Okay? I'm happy to do any more, but I'm looking for my hand. I got to go. Okay. Thank you, guys. Have a great set of careers, and good luck.